Hello everybody, welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. I'm joined by a very, very special guest this week in Tom Reynolds, who is currently the first team scout of Eintracht Frankfurt and has had an absolutely unbelievable career in football so far. And we're here to talk about everything Bundesliga, recruitment and artificial intelligence. First of all, Tom, thank you very, very much for joining me. I just want you to introduce yourself to the audience and talk about how your career has gone from where you started to where you are right now.
So I'll start at the beginning then.
Yeah.
So many moons ago, I think it was 13, 14 years ago, started at Reading Football Club. So I was a academy analyst. So we were the guys that were coding games that used to take us about 24 hours. Obviously, it's come a long way since then. And then when I went to university to do a sports science degree, I then just after that joined Charlton Football Club as a sports scientist. So absolutely brilliant time. Worked on gaining knowledge and working with a lot of different people around the club. Obviously on rehab, prehab, making sure that players were on the football pitch and making sure we could maximise their time. At the same time, I also had a job at Opta as a data collector, as a football analyst. So the dream job for absolutely everyone. You watch football and it's like you're playing FIFA, you're collecting all the data. Absolutely brilliant. And then, I joined Opta Pro like full time and I was there for about 10 years in multiple different roles. So I started off in a role where it was about data was just coming to the forefront of the sport, and it was about trying to educate teams in England and around the world about how best to use it and also what advantage it can give you. At the time, obviously not everyone had it, so if you took it on and you was an early adopter of it, how could it benefit you and how could it win you points? And then obviously that allowed me to build a lot of connections, going out into departments and helping them to set up departments, and then obviously forged some connections in which then took me to Russia with after talking with the Red Bull group quite often. I joined Ralf Rangnick in Lokomotiv Moscow as head of data. So we always said that the analogy was helping them go from a locomotive to a modern day train.
Nice.
And it was about obviously setting up a data department in which obviously Ralf wanted to do a lot of consultancy work. So it was about making sure that they were in a place where we could leave them and people could come in and then build upon it as well. Obviously that got cut short with the invasion. And then after that I was out of work for a little while, but then joined Eintracht Frankfurt as a first team scout.
Oh, it's like, that's unreal. Do you know, like someone who loves European football, it's like you've gone like mental.
You can probably tell that I'm a massive fan of European football.
Honestly. I want to start with football intelligence team lead, moving into AI innovation manager. So one of the things that when I was looking at your career stood out to me so much was the work you did at Opta, at Stats Perform. So you worked as an AI innovation manager from 2020 to 2021. And I want you to, for someone who loves data, loves how it's used in football, especially when it's used correctly, as you're saying, what does AI look like in football? What does that look like?
So first of all, I explained the role. So the role was we had 20 in-house data scientists and they worked on multiple sports. So obviously when they come into the football domain, it was about making sure that we have like a project lead that is a connection from the clubs into the company, and also then double checking the models and making sure that we can then sell them to the clubs. So it's essentially going out and over the years of having those connections and maintaining those relationships, going out and understanding what models wanted to be built. Obviously from a financial perspective, you couldn't build every single model, and obviously every model wasn't going to be built, wasn't going to be sold. So we had to decide what was going to be built, and obviously we decided that way is what was going to have the biggest impact in football. So it was a case that we would come together weekly. There was a team of 4 or 5 of us that obviously looked after the data scientists and making sure that the models were doing what we needed them to do. So obviously when you build a data model, they don't always react to the rules of football. So we needed to make sure that certain rules were being incorporated. So the rules of football, like the offside rule, for example, a model could tell you that a player in the ideal position is going to stand near the goal. But obviously if he receives the ball, he's going to be offside. So it's like almost sense checking it. But also then the second part of the role was going out into the clubs and explaining how it works and basically the science behind it. So I was like the football brain, but also understanding data a little bit and bringing it together, and also explaining it in a way where the football person did understand it. Obviously there's coaches in the room, there's sporting directors in the room. Like they understand football, but they may not understand data. I mean, obviously football's come on a long way now, and
sure.
you do get sporting directors that do understand data. But it was about making sure that we explain the model in the right way, in which obviously it was half selling it, but also half making sure that they fully understood it. So that was a brilliant role. It was just making sure that everything that we built could then be built upon, and we could make better versions. And I mean, we speak about XG, like, of course,
obviously.
Back in, I think it was 2013, Sam Green from Opta actually come up with it and come up with the model, and we're still talking about it now, and it's become part of modern day football, right? So it's about now building on top of those models. We have expected assists, we have prevented goals, so it's about making sure that we can take it further. Yeah,
so you've just said there, the development of models in football, and the XG model, expected threat, is a new one that's basically being valued across Europe right now. If we've come that far in 10 years from not disregarding expected goals, but it not being accepted in standard football, modern football, and now we've got to a point where you watch Sky Sports and they put it on the full-time stat graphic. What does, if you could even begin to explain it, what does like the next 10 years of artificial intelligence, model design, data look like in football? What do you think that looks like?
I think we were quite slow in the last 10 years. I know it's come on a lot, and as I say, it was all about making sure that we educate people, and I think sometimes the terminology that we use when we explain models can help people to adopt it or actually dismiss it. And I think if we just explain it in footballing terms rather than using, I don't know, scientific names for something that, as you say, like it needs explaining as to what it is. Like if you was just to explain it in footballing terms, I think people become adopters and actually understand it a little bit better.
Rather than numbers or a data.
Exactly. It's almost like football jargon. Like you need a dictionary to understand what you actually mean by it. But if you were to just put it in simple football terms, for me, prevented goals is quite an easy metric to understand, right? It's about how many goals the average goalkeeper is going to prevent. And I literally explain the definition of the words using the words. So it's like it completely makes sense. Whereas expected goals, a very simple explanation is what is the chance quality of that shot, and what is the chance that shot's going to be turned into a goal. But I think in 10 years time, like we're seeing teams like Brighton completely changing their recruitment department. Like they've gone from X amount of scouts down to 3 scouts and rely heavily on data. So I think a lot of clubs will look at that and see whether they can follow suit and see whether it works or not. But I mean, some of the things that are being talked about in the football space, like certain companies with game intelligence models and sort of some of the stuff that they're coming up with are brilliant ideas and can really help to bridge the gap between what we see with our eyes when we're watching football and also what the data can tell us. I think right now is sometimes they don't marry up very well. Like sometimes we can look at the data and then when we watch video footage, you're like, okay, I'm not too sure where it's come from. And again, obviously every data company has different definitions, so there's slightly different things. So I think again, we'll probably see a centralized standard of definitions and making sure that across certain data companies or across all data companies, models will look similar.
Would you say, are you scared or excited about what data could do in the future? Because if you just spoke about there the Brighton aspect of and what they're doing in terms of the recruitment, you're a scout yourself, co-hosting me, he's been a scout before in football. I've worked in recruitment a little bit in football. Could it end up in a situation where they cease to exist?
I mean, with Brighton, obviously, they've reduced the number of scouts. So, I mean, potentially. I hope not. But the way I see data, and I always say this to everyone, for me, it's a tool. It's another tool in your arsenal. Like, if you're driving a car, you're going to have a toolkit in the boot. Like, sometimes you're going to need to pull it out if your tyre gets flat. But I think for us, especially at Eintracht Frankfurt, like we have a small data department, but a very good data department. We do things very targeted. If there's gaps in which we want to fulfill, we'll do it. And we also won't sign a player unless we look at their data as well. So I think it's, again, another tool in your arsenal that majority of teams use. And again, how much reliance they have on it will differ from club to club. But if you're not using it, then you should be using it. You
spoke about the development of data. And when I think about it, like how gradually exposed we've become to data and how much more understanding there is in the public domain about data. It's really exciting stuff. Like, it's really good in terms of the potential, the ceiling of clubs like Frankfurt, clubs like Lokomotiv Moscow. And I want to move on to your job at Lokomotiv Moscow, where you said that you worked a lot with Ralf Rangnick. He was at the forefront of probably the first, I don't know how to word this, but probably the first popular recruitment setup. I think everyone knew about Red Bull recruitment. Do you know when the Brightons were coming up, it was always Red Bull first.
Yep.
They were the ones in like mid-10s who were plucking these players out of nowhere. And how influential is he himself as a football and director of football, been on football, and what have you learned from a person like that?
So Ralf is a genius. The way that he thinks about football is completely different to a lot of people that I've worked with prior. He's always open to new ideas. He likes to adopt things early. And also, I think the thing with Ralf is he employs people and believes in them. So, I mean, when I've worked at clubs prior as the data guy, is you will present the data's opinion on a player. You will present what the data is saying. Whereas Ralf would get us in a room and would each make sure that we're all watching a player. So that's where the head of data analysis and scout come in. It was making sure that everyone watched the player and everyone had the opinion on a player. So it wasn't just, Tom's going to present the opinion of the data. It was Tom's going to present his opinion on the player, but also then we'll back up whether what someone says confirm or deny with the data. But yeah, he is a genius. I learnt so much from him. To be honest, we only worked together for a short time. He obviously joined your team, and is now doing a great job at Austria. I mean, obviously the background of him was that he loves to have a clear playing philosophy, and even when he's a sporting director or when he's head of sports development at Lokomotiv Moscow, it is about making sure that everything is built around the players so that they can perform their best when they're on the pitch. So making sure they have a clear understanding of what they need to do when they're on the pitch, in and out of possession, making sure that they are eating the right way, making sure that their travel to the training ground or travel to the stadium is shortened. Everything needs to be so efficient. So we'd employ sports scientists from other sports to making sure that we're getting fresh ideas. We're making sure that sports psychologists come in working with the players, making sure that their mind is free, that they can go on the pitch and perform to their best. And yeah, that's one thing that Ralph's really good at. I mean, you look at how he's turned around the Austrian national team, and obviously the Euros didn't go probably as what we expected. But yeah, I think they completely saw a difference, especially after obviously the time at Man United where people were saying, is he a sporting director, is he a manager? And for me, in my eyes, he's a genius.
Wow. I think it's so annoying for me because when he come in, as I said there, he was the most popular guy in terms of recruitment, in terms of niche recruitment, finding these gems. When he joined Manchester United, I was so excited because I knew he weren't a coach at that time. I knew that's not where he excelled. He'd not coached for a decade up until that point. And obviously he's still proven to be a good coach at Austria. And when he joined on the consultancy role that you're talking about with Lokomotiv Moscow. And I think when he would come in, I was almost hoping that it felt perfect in my eyes. He come into a depleted squad. He was going to get a first hands-on look at the squad, know where the players psychologically, mentally, physically were not performing. And then at the end of the season, we'd get a coach and he would stay spearheading the sporting direction of the club, and that never happened. And for me, I was bewildered as to why you got a guy who'd had this amazing career in recruitment, got him in as a coach, let him get a feel out for the squad, and then boom, gone. And it was like, obviously the clips of him always talk about open heart surgery in Manchester United get replayed every single year now because we are constantly going through that surgery. And did you feel like that? Because for me, it was such a disappointment because in my eyes, what Ineos have done right now with the recruitment in terms of the people they've appointed, it's like we had a guy who had experience and was vocal and was like good in the way he spoke, communicated with the fans. And obviously that wasn't under Ineos, so I can't blame it on them, but it was almost like we had the guy and why did we not follow him? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you ever feel like so harsh?
I get for me, Ralf, you go back to talking about Red Bull, and obviously they were what everyone looked at towards obviously the Haalands and I mean Mateus Cunha. There's been I mean I won't even name the obvious ones like Sadio Mane, Dayot Upamecano. Like they've been everywhere. And the one thing with his philosophy, as I say, is not only clear playing style but also clear recruitment philosophy. Like I think he was also the one that set up. I said, to be honest, I'm directing it at Ralf, but that group of people, that group of team, you always got to give the department credit. It's not always down to one person. Obviously, they're at the top and they'll always get the credit. But the whole department obviously help in that regard. And he was the one that sort of saw the commercial perspective of it as well. So, like, we talk about football being a business now, but I don't think that was ever really talked about prior to Red Bull's multi-club ownership model, recruitment model. So they wanted, basically, we buy young players and we buy them, we develop them and we sell them. And again, that's not only a recruitment perspective, that's a coaching perspective, because the development side of things, obviously from his coaching background, he wanted to make sure and also believed in the fact that he could make players better and fulfill their potential. So it's about every time we scouted, it was where do we see their potential? How can we, is there certain elements in their game that we can coach them and we can develop them, get them to reach their potential and sell them on for more than we bought them for? And I mean, every club wants to do that now, right? Is every club looks at the young players. Every club is, I mean, every time we're looking at the youngest player that's made their debut, we're not the only ones around the world that have done it. Like every single club will now be, especially through data as well and social media, like everyone, we now know when Estevao has made his debut. Like everyone knows that a 16-year-old has made their debut in Colombia or Brazil. And whereas before it wasn't that easy, like you had to adopt the data to find that information, whereas now social media highlight it for us. And of course, certain clubs have certain ways of highlighting that or getting an alert. And I think with Ralf, it was his whole idea. I mean, it was talked about when he was at Manchester United, but the amount of managers that the amount of clubs that have copied his recruitment direction, the amount of coaches that also copy his playing style or are disciples of him is just unbelievable. It's endless. And again, I think me as a scout, the amount that I learned from him and his eye and his brain is, and not only him, like his number 2, Lars Konecka, was a video analyst under Ralf and has been followed him around everywhere. And I think Ralf would be the first one to say that Lars is almost like now his brains, because he sees everything. Like I was speaking to Lars when we was out in Lokomotiv Moscow, and I'm one of them. I want to learn everything. I know that we can't know everything, but even to some points that weren't my job, I was just like, I wanted to understand why he thought the way that he did, because I thought if I can get under the hood of that, then I'm going to become better. I mean, some of the things that he taught me just through like a 5-minute post-match conversation when we're in the hotel afterwards, like I still think about those to this day. Like and again, it's nothing that's complex. Like if you think about gegenpressing, like, and the counter pressing, like the time it takes and the distance you are to go. Like, to be honest, if you take a step back, it's not complex. It's just simplistic. However, how many times can you then put the tactics surrounding how to implement that and making sure that you do it efficiently and effectively, and also to then retreat if it doesn't work. Like if the first 5 seconds doesn't work, like retreat, and then making sure that we're in position to then get the second phase or the third phase. And like certain things that I learned was so simplistic, but sometimes we try and look a bit more difficult, and strip. What Ralf is good at is stripping it back to the basics, but also building pillars to the point where we're so well drilled that any situation we face on the football pitch, every single player on that pitch will know what their role is, and that's what he done really well.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I always think about with like your Thomas Tuchel's, your Jurgen Klopp's, the German managers, obviously. But the counter pressing element of them and the pressing element is like talked about a lot in terms of the complexity of what they're trying to do. People speak about hybrid pressing now, zonal, man to man. But at the end of the day, if you strip it all back and you recruit well with a physical flooring and you task everyone with a man to man, then it comes a lot clearer once you've got the environment around you.
I think the similarities between a Tuchel, a Klopp, a Rangnick, obviously is the system, but also they're the individuals that will get every individual working as a team. And if you don't work as a team, then you are just 11 individuals. And if one man's not doing his job, then it breaks down. And again, that's when you will see a lot of flaws in a system. And I mean, obviously your team with Amarin now, it'll be interesting to see how he can coach that team into a certain system. I mean, I think it's a great appointment. I think Ineos have done well there to bring him in. And I think I think the squad of Manchester United is maybe not quite set up for his system. So that's, for me, how it will be interesting.
Yeah,
how does he get them, exactly, and how does he get those guys to all work as a team rather than the individuals?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that the one player cannot not press, otherwise it all falls apart. Because every time someone says that, it always brings up that Rangnick quote about being half pregnant. So you can't be half pregnant, and it's so true though. It's like you either all in or you're not, and that's one thing that my club especially have suffered with a lot, which is half pressing and giving it. Oh, we might press a little bit here.
His metaphors and his analogies, they really make me laugh. Like, I mean, I actually didn't know it about him, but he actually studied in England.
Did he?
And he has got an English side to him.
Yeah.
Like, and when you speak to him, some of the things I'm like, and then it actually got us into, when we was at Lokomotiv, obviously there was like a lot of German people there, and obviously a lot of Russians, and I was one of the English guys in the department. So we used to get into this thing about, they would talk about what German phrases are and translate them to English, and they were so funny.
I always thought when he comes to Manchester United, like his voice was so like, he knows like every word. Like he never hesitated. He was never hesitant in like his press conferences. He was so spot on with everything. But no, yeah, brilliant. I just want to move on into going from obviously your job at Lokomotiv Moscow to now, which is at Frankfurt. Now, for people who don't know, Frankfurt are doing very, very, very well at the moment, and over the past 2 seasons since you've been there, the average recruitment age, or the average age per player recruited in that time, is 21.7 years old, which is exceptional to say the least of where you are in a table right now as a club. The way the manager's playing, the way the system is, how much unison there is in the squad, but also how well you've recruited young, talented, ferocious players. And I'm sure everyone will know about Marmoush. So yeah, I just want you to explain how this is a really interesting one for me, because we speak about a lot of this with like me and a few other people. It's like recruiting for Bundesliga. You've recruited in Russia, and now you're recruiting in Germany. Is there certain attributes that clubs look for as a general overview, not just Frankfurt? Because there's this stigma that the German league is always end to end. Everyone counter presses. Everyone presses high. Everyone's looking for attacking transitions. There's space everywhere. Would you agree with that? And B, is there any attributes that fall right into the way the German league is that you would, as a scout, look for?
I think at Frankfurt we know the playing style that we want to play, and we're comfortable with that. As I say, there's Bayern Munich who will dominate every single game and dominate possession into the higher 70%. We're a team that will sit back and invite pressure onto us and then hit them in transition. Like as you spoke about, we've got Marmoush, we've got Ekitike, and they're 2 strikers that athletically are fantastic. Like there can't be many double striker pairings in the world that are as ferocious, I use your word, and dangerous in transitions than those 2 are. Their distinct dribbling ability, the ability to position themselves in a way that they're going to receive first, and also be able to be multi-dimensional when we're in transition as well. I don't think we become predictable, and that's one of our strengths. Is there sometimes you'll have a 2 versus 2, and every time the decision making from the strikers will be similar. However, they're not only they're very multi-dimensional in the sense that they could go 2 versus 2, they could go 2 versus 3, and still come out as winners. Yeah. And for us, we know what we want to do, and for us as a club, that makes and a scouting department, it makes our job easy, because we don't look at the style of the league, we look at the style of us as a club, and obviously we need to make sure that every player that we're recruiting for can come into our system. I always say it, and maybe I'm at risk of sounding a little bit crazy, but the best players in the world will not fit into every single system. Yeah. Like they're the best for a reason, because they have certain attributes, and those attributes won't fit into certain styles. And of course, we'd love to have the best players in the world, but I think that's what we try and do, is we try and find the best youngster that fits our system. And again, I think we do it successfully in the sense that we buy low and we sell high, and also we're a multidisciplinary team within the club. Like, we've got coaching staff that can develop and can nurture talent, and I think again clubs are looking towards us now in terms of our recruitment and making sure they keep an eye on how we're developing players, and then want to be the ones that benefit from a sale from us, and that's what the best clubs in the world do best, is they recruit for their particular system and they have an identity. If you don't have an identity, then it makes everyone else's job difficult. It's similar to what we're talking about, is every individual on that pitch has a role and everyone in a club has a certain role, but if you don't know what the top thing that you're recruiting for or developing for is, then you won't get there, because you don't know what the end goal is. Whereas for us, it's a distinct playing style. We know that whatever player we're looking at has to fit into the playing style, otherwise we're not going to sign them.
So just moving on into actual scouting recruitment process, and not just speaking about Frankfurt, but in general clubs. When I've ever worked in recruitment, we basically just do numbers. So we do video, but then we convert that into numbers, and it's like a power ranking system. Like in your career, we want to know, like, is there a model that you have to fit your scouting process into, your framework, the way you go about your day-to-day scouting, or is there a sense that we can trust your process and what you do? So, for example, just speaking from experience, I'd go into get given a player who's been assigned by someone else, and then we'll go watch a good amount of them, as first assess the physicals, and then put technicals into numbers, and then rank them in a power league, for say. So that would be the process that I would usually do. But I was wondering, throughout your career, how have these systems varied, and how quickly and how educated you could become a player?
I think a power ranking is good. I mean, there might be some data scientists out there that disagree with me, but especially when you're looking at such a plethora of data, you want a quick ranking, right? Get me the top fives that are strong in this category, this category, and this category, and it works. I mean, it's efficient. And again, I think the power of the data is it depends what part of the process it's at. I mean, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the first identification of a player? Are you focusing on, okay, we've done our live scouting, we've done our video scouting on the player, now we just want to, because the thing as scouts is you can't watch 38 games of a player.
No.
That takes, a game is an hour and a half, that's going to take
a long time.
A long time, and by that time the player is signed by someone else.
Yeah.
So it's a case that we need to first use the data to fully identify a player. Is, as I already spoke about, Estevayo in Brazil.
Yeah.
Like, we know he's made his debut. Let's get our eyes on him now. Have we got any reports on him already? Because obviously he played for Brazil youth teams, so we may have been scouting at those tournaments or at those games. So we already know he's played. Let's get some eyes on him from a live sense, from a video perspective, and then from our data, the data fills the gap for those 38 games that we can't see. So
the median performance, the average performance.
Exactly, and again is, every club will use it in a different way. Like, is how good is this player against the top teams? How good is this player against the small teams? If your scout has seen him for 5, 6, 7 games, has he seen him against top opponents? Has he seen him against a combination of opponents? Has multiple scouts seen him? What are their opinions on him? For me, I like to use the data in a little bit of a different way, especially from a performance analysis perspective. I mean, going back to when I was head of data at Lokomotiv Moscow, we wanted to change the formation, wanted to change the system. So we finished one season in one system, and then we wanted to go into the new season with a new system. We had the summer to work on it, but the preparation that we done as to whether we decided to do it or not was really interesting. There was a few coaches. There was Sasha Marf, who works for FSG now. He was our goalkeeping coach out in Lokomotiv Moscow. Lars Konetka, as I said, is Ralf's number 2 at Austria. And also Marvin Kompa, ex-Celtic, he's at St. Gallen now. We all got in a room and we wanted to change the style to a false 9 system. So what we done is we all come up with ideas as to who played the false 9 system, and not only have they played it, but who done it well. And then we come to Spain. When Spain played it with multiple different people, and then what we done is we looked at it from different perspectives. So from a defensive perspective, how easy is it to defend, and how do they defend it? And that's what the coach has done. And from a data perspective, I looked at it and gone, okay, this is the certain scenarios that we get into. What KPIs can we use to then track that performance in the data? Then we pulled the data, and then we actually figured out that where certain touches were being taken from the false nine, where certain rotations were, who the rotations were with. And long story short, we actually decided that it was going to take us too long with the players that we had in-house to then try and play it, and we don't think we would have been efficient enough to do it. So we actually opted for a different system. So again, from a performance analysis perspective, I think that's quite a nice way to look at things. I mean, Ian Graham always talks about how data was used to recruit Jurgen Klopp, and how they predicted that the certain season that he had was actually not his strongest season, exactly, but in a sense that in another season or in another way is they see him being a top coach and developing players. And another one that we done with some game intelligence data was we noticed that when we build out from the back, we weren't utilising our central midfielders' strengths. He was someone that can get on the ball, dictate the tempo, and we wanted to make sure that we could get him on the ball. And so we used data to figure out, also video as well, like as I say, there are two tools that work together, and it was always that we'll look at the top teams that do it well in this system, we'll track the KPIs, how they do it, and then I always like to reverse engineer success. So first of all, you've got to define what success is. Like, is that winning a game? Is it winning a battle in midfield? And then working back from there. So actually looking at the steps in which actually get you there, and then working backwards to then make it work in the club. And that was interesting because we didn't know whether, once we started doing it and he started to get more touches on the ball, we didn't then know whether he actually wasn't performing as well as we thought he could. And we wanted to understand why. And we actually looked at certain data, and when he was getting on the ball, what was happening before was that he was actually getting better running options ahead of him than when we changed the system. We were getting the ball to him, but the runs ahead of him were actually becoming a lot less efficient. So we actually, as I say, two performance analysis examples were actually changing style, better in the style, and making sure that we perfect the style. And so it was a case that the coach was saying, okay, we've implemented this new style, and now this player, is he off form? Is he just lost it? And then we could prove with the data that it was actually the options surrounding him that were, obviously he was deciding to do something else with the ball and keeping it ticking rather than playing forward. So it's actually a really interesting project in the way that we approach things. It was basically it was all about that system, and I think I've said it like 900 times now, but it's all about the playing style.
You said you used numbers to identify a new style or a new system to segue from season to season, and use the off season to implement and put right the numbers. What numbers? How do you know what I mean? How do you identify it's a big tweak, and it's not tweak, it's a change. So how would you, looking at data, manipulate that number to go, all right, that's what we need?
I think first and foremost is you need to have a tactical understanding of the game. And as I say, is we don't need to complicate anything. It could be just a case of when Liverpool or Man City do something well, in this case Spain, when they do it well and they score goals, so that's the success. Also, when they score goals, how do they get the ball to the players that are scoring goals? And is it the case that when the false nine drops to receive, are there people around him in central areas? How far are they around him? And again, it could just be that you're looking at how many touches happen in the half space area, who are they by? But then from a coaching perspective is, okay, these rotations are happening. Are they instinctive? Are they taught? So it was a case that we put everything together. And again, so Sasha from a out of possession perspective, from a goalkeeper and a centre-back's perspective, how easy is it to defend a number 9 that drops deep? Or how easy is it to defend such quick rotations, and how easy is it to defend when the central midfielder is getting on the ball when you know that the playing style is going to go through him? If you play 5 games and everything's going through this central midfielder, in the next 5 games, everyone's going to know it and they're going to step onto him. How do we then become a plan B? How do we then plan for a plan C? And then how do we then still become so effective? And I mean, some of the projects that we've done, as I say, that was a really nice learning curve. Hopefully, I mean, it was for me, but hopefully it was for them as well, to see the power of the data as well, to see that you don't have to overcomplicate anything. It could just be a heat map as to what does it look like when players touch the ball and how do defences react to it.
So, like, let's just, if I was to give you an example of, like, just pick a club right now who's struggling, like Southampton in the Premier League, right? So they've got a current system where it's very evident what they're trying to do. Everything's trying to build out the back, a lot of touches in deep defence. You include the keeper, +1 always, slow, break through the lines and then attack fast. That's what they're trying to do. If you were to look at the numbers, how would you, as a scout, as a guy who's so involved in data at that club, how would you look at the data and go, right, this is what we need to look at, this is how we improve? Would it be the direction where you're putting the ball to, how quickly you're moving the ball? What would you look at if you were measuring? That's just a hypothetical, by the way. I'm not digging out anyone. I'm just giving you
it's a good example because Russell Martin has been successful with it, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And now obviously the success is not currently there. So for me, I'd strip it back and go, when we were successful, why were we doing it? And again, some people may argue that yes, the quality of opposition was a lot weaker and the quality of their players was a lot stronger. But for me, it's not. Sometimes it's not as simple as that. And I think sometimes I've talked about stripping back the complexity, but it is more complex than that. Like even, I mean, we look at Man City, right? Is last year they were the strongest in the league, and now they're not the strongest in the league. So what's changed? Because not everyone around them has got stronger. So you strip it back into certain parts of the game, right? Is not moving from here to moving to the other goal is one part. There's so many different intricacies that happen, and for example, the first ball to the centre back or the first ball to the right back, that needs to be broken down into, and again, when you're inviting pressure, so when you build out slowly, what pressure are you inviting? Is it the sense that the first ball forward is too early? Is it that the pressure is not being invited on too much, and where the space is being created? But I mean, it's just, I was going to say it's as simple as that, but it's not as simple as that because there's so many different things that go into it. There's so many factors at play. But that's how I would do it, is I'd break it down into the first instance and then look at the second phase, the third phase, and again, then try and have a look at what trends. So again, when we were successful with it, what was actually going right and what things were we doing right then? Like, was it the fact that we were then working it quickly into the final third and then putting a half-space cross in along the floor or in the air? What type of goals were we scoring? What type of goals do we concede? Like, there's so many different aspects, but I mean, we'd probably need a whole YouTube channel on that.
I know, yeah. No, it's interesting because I find it fascinating numbers in terms of correlating to performance. Like, first team, right on the front, you're in there creating solutions off data. And we spoke before about how artificial intelligence and game models and models in the game work and stuff like that. What would you say would be, if you could even think about it, what would be the next big thing in terms of models? So we've had expected goals, and that's developed hugely. I think headers has changed a lot in terms of positioning, goalkeeper positioning, situated players on the pitch. Like, that's changed a lot. And as you said before, you thought that as soon as we come in, we were a bit new to it. It's like we didn't know what to do with it, and now it's developed so much so fast, where Opta's models changed so many times in the past recent times. So what we've gone from expected goals, passing networks, zones of control, stuff like that. What would you even foresee that's going to happen with models, intelligence, and data?
I mean, to be honest, there's already models out there that the public aren't privy to, that clubs use. I mean, you can probably confirm or deny that, but there's certain models like expected receiver, expected pass. So essentially, if we were to play this pass X amount of times, how successful it would be. I spoke about the example of the central midfielder was Konstantin Maradashvili at the time. We spoke about getting him on the ball, and the options ahead of him weren't as strong as they once were, and we used expected receivers models. So it was a sense that we looked at the likelihood in which in their positioning or the run type that they made, what was the likelihood that he would receive a pass? And then you can tie it to expected threat and have a look at if he was to receive the ball in this space, how often does it then lead to a goal within the next 5 seconds, within the next 7 seconds? And so there's certain models that clubs are already utilising. That obviously, that's where the commercial part of it comes into,
of course,
and obviously the public are. But I think media are always a little bit slower to adopt the models because of what I spoke about at the start, is some of them are really hard to explain. So for example, when COVID stopped professional football at Opta, we actually moved those models into the media space and how best we can put up some graphics on TV that the fan can actually adopt and actually really quickly understand. So, we come up with X amount of examples about top 3 passers and how best to explain that to the public. But it's slowly, if we drip feed it and we drip feed some of the information, I think probably a plug for the channel, but Gary and Jamie do a good job of it, especially with Monday Night Football and how they slowly introduce certain metrics and those guys wanting to be on top of what it actually means. And there's X amount of models that clubs are using already, but some of the things that we're talking about, especially in, when I talk to other people that are interested in data, there's certain styles in which players will defend, and how best can we utilize their movement as a player, like how best can they use their body shape to then restrict threat on their own goal, for example. The fullback for Liverpool is going to be different to the fullback for Frankfurt because we face completely different scenarios. So can we make sure that every part of the game is narrowed down so that we can analyse, compare apples to apples and pairs to pairs? It's not, Trent's going to face completely different to what Christensen does because of the scenarios in which we will sit back, and obviously Trent will be higher up the pitch. So when we're ranking them as a defender, and when they have to defend, they're going to face different scenarios, different different types of one versus one. So how can we make sure that when we've got a data set comparing 30 different leagues of completely different distinct styles for defenders, how best can we utilize it in the data rather than having to try and watch as much video as we can? I'll just caveat that obviously data is always going to be there, and video is always going to be there. We always marry the two. We do everything together. As I say, is we won't sign a player unless we have the data on him. We won't sign a player unless we've seen him X amount of times, X amount of scouts have seen him. So there's a complete process in the way that every club will use the data. I spoke about the process earlier. Is it the first identification phase? Is it the middle phase? Is it then teeing up the games that you've missed? Everyone will do that, and it's not just the case that we look at the data and we go, he's got 7.6 expected assists and he's only got 4 assists, so he's actually a decent creator, but he's not getting the credits for it, so he's a hidden gem. There's so much more to it. We don't just look at 5 stats.
What you just said there, I want to touch on this, right? So you just mentioned that you could go on FBref, for example, free tool out there for data, and you could go look at expected assists or plus minus expected assists, so you can see a creator who's creating numerous amounts of chances but aren't finishing them. In the public domain, in social media right now, it seems to be a thing where it's like, take old Marmoush, for example. He scored loads of goals, created loads of assists, and he's having an overperformance this year in terms of last year and the seasons before that. And if you looked at his numbers, you'd go, okay, there's an overperformance here. This is a player who's hit a heights that he hasn't previously hit. But you would counteract that and say, well, no, because I've got this number here that shows we've changed the dynamics in terms of him playing. So we're getting him in better angles that suit him. And look at his shot map, and he likes to shoot from this angle. So you think it goes so much more deeper in terms of understanding a player's ability to score, create, not just off 1 or 2 stats, you have to go full in.
100%. We changed our system this season to we did last season. In terms of the playing style, it's fairly similar, but in terms of the roles that each player has individually, we altered it a little bit. And credit to the coaching staff, and also credit to the data analysts that we were talking about earlier. Some of the stuff that we do internally as a team and as a department, we're always trying to look. You spoke about earlier about expected goals and headers declining. We've done a lot of seasonal analysis and a lot of research over the past 20 years where the data is available to us on certain things to do with the game, and trying to make sure that we're staying ahead of the game, and we're also trying to predict where the future lies so that we can be on top of it, and we can be the team that are actually making sure that we're at the forefront of where the game's going to turn into. And again, that's where data can play a role, is prediction is massive. Is sometimes, as I say, a lot of the models are predictions as well. It's like, what if this happened? What if that happened? And for us as well, as I say, like, not every dribble is the same. Not every 1v1 is the same. There's so many different factors and so much different context that goes into that individual skill, and it's about trying to understand it. And also, from a recruitment perspective, it's like, when we sign Marmoush, we know what we want to do with him. It's just, it might take a little bit of time for us to get there. And with any player is, I mean, the job of a scout is to try and reduce the risk of a transfer. So when we're paying a transfer figure, when we're paying a player a salary, is we want them to come in and hit the ground running. So we need to make sure that we're putting everything in place so that they can come in and do their job as well as we know that they can do. Yeah. And I think we're forever looking at ways where we can, I mean, every one of our starting 11 and the squad beyond that, the subs and the players that just play a bit part role at the moment, we squad plan so often. We know that if X player is going to leave, we know who's going to take his spot. We know the depth chart. We know how many minutes roughly they're going to get per season. Everything is planned to a T. Again, the job of a scout is so much more than just going out and watching a player. We need to know we have to watch our own team often, because if there's certain intricacies in the game that we see, we need to make sure that when we're watching a player, we can try and have a look at those isolated events or those isolated scenarios in which they're performing that for their current team than the ones that we would face at Frankfurt in the Bundesliga.
Would you say the tweaks that you've made, you've alluded to the tweaks you made in the off-season, I'm not going to ask you what the tweaks are, obviously, but they're obviously working, and the front two are absolutely brilliant. So, like, we know that that's been a success for you in terms of getting output out of the forwards. Obviously, you've got a lot of points as well. You're high up the table. You know, it's working. As a scout, as a team in your department, do you look at what's happening right now and just go, this is what we want, like, this is what we expected to happen? Or do you look at it and go, we've done an absolutely amazing job here, we've shot way higher than we ever could have thought? Or do you literally just sit there, look at the roles that each player are playing, the zones where they're influencing the game, the type of players you've got for the style, and do you go, that's what we expected to happen?
I think for me, I'm a realist. I enjoy the success while it's happening, but also my job is not what happens on the pitch now. Is once we sign a player, we're now on to the next one, and again, I always want the players to do well, because I know that that's going to attract a lot of interest, and then obviously our job is then to make sure that we're then bringing in a player that's as good as that player, and that's what's exciting. I mean, every single club and every single scout in every single club has a different project than what we do. So there's certain markets in which we'll shop in. There's certain, as I say, there's certain players that just won't fit our system. Yeah. So whereas I don't know, another team in England, like Aston Villa, for example, is they might have similar caliber of player that they're looking at, or similar leagues that they're looking at, but obviously need a player that's a little bit different. So, I mean, I watch Frankfurt, I watch every game of Frankfurt because I need to know what's happening on the pitch, and I need to know those intricacies. Obviously, I don't talk to the manager every day, and that's not
understand the roles.
Exactly. So I need to make sure that the communication is me taking in that information with my eyes and making sure that I adapt my scouting so that we're adapting for what we see on the pitch. And for me, that's what's exciting, is when you sign a player and then he does really well, or to be honest, even if we don't sign him and he goes on somewhere else and performs really well, it's a nice reminder that you're actually doing an okay job. But I mean, I spoke about it earlier, is scouting is not down to one person. Like, someone might find a player and then suggest him to the rest of the department and talk about him in a scouting meeting, but if I'm being completely honest, I reckon 17 of us will see a player before we sign him. Oh, really? So, yeah, and again, that's without the data.
You'll know that they fit. So you're saying everyone will recognise the same player at the same time?
No. To be honest, that's the fun part of a scouting department.
Because there's so many different opinions.
I mean, everyone talks about cooks in the kitchen and being too many of them. But I mean, our scouting meetings are interesting because we'll put players forward and other players, like, we're a good department in which we cover everything. And so whenever I highlight a player, someone would already have seen him. Of course, someone needs to see them first, and it might be our top talent department. So our top talent department focuses on players that are just below the first team, around 15 upwards, and they'll always see them for the international teams and have a report in the system. But again, for those that don't know, is clubs will handle scouting reports differently as well. So me being at Frankfurt is we don't see reports of other scouts because it could bias us. It could change our opinion on a player. So our scouting meetings where we meet as a whole department are the times in which we will, I could suggest a player and then another scout that's based in Germany can talk about his opinion on the player, and then it'll be a big back and forth as to, it's not me against you, it's let's put all these opinions in the pot, and then obviously when we have all these opinions on multiple players, let's pick out the opinions in which everyone is quite similar, in the sense that for us is we have 15 grades on a player and they're all really close together. We have the data's opinion on a player, we have his physical data on a player, like, so we'll also look at his physical data, like can he meet our thresholds of the team in terms of sprinting capacity or certain distances, certain accelerations, loads of different metrics that we look at. And again, we look at the metrics as opinions as well. And so there's so much that goes into scouting a player. And again, as a scout, you have to work on the fact that our record transfer is 18 million euros. We are not going to go out and sign a player for 25 million euros. It's just not what we will do. We will always try and look for your Hugo Larssons, or for example, your Colin Mawani's on a free, or your Omar Marmoush on a free. Like, we hopefully will see something in the player in which we can come in and raise his transfer fee and sell him on for more. And again, I think every club's trying to do the same. They just do it in their own different way. But we won't sign a player unless everyone sees them.
Is there attributes in leagues that you look at? I know there's a tie to American football, not the sport, I mean American leagues. And I know there's certain links across Scandinavia, huge market at the moment. Is there certain leagues and attributes in certain leagues? So I know, for example, that on the surface level of stuff that I think Ligue 1's got like the second highest running capacity in Europe's top 5 leagues. I'm pretty sure that's right. So I would know that Ligue 1 players have probably got a good chance of exceeding in the Premier League because of the physical floor and stuff like that. Is there leagues and attributes that you can see outside of Bundesliga that, so for example, the Austrian Bundesliga, even something as simple as that? Would you look at something, or would you look at an attribute, a style of a league, and go, we know the hit rate on that market's really good?
For me, every single league has a difference. But I spoke earlier about teams within a league all having distinct styles, and again, players within a team all having distinct styles. And again, it's about, I mean, if you were to look at, I don't know, Bayern Munich's fullbacks, there's so many different profiles. You look at Rafael Guerreiro, completely different profile to Alphonso Davies. Alphonso Davies is going to be one of the fastest in the league. Rafael Guerreiro, one of the most technical players in the league. So if you were to just, again, obviously that's not someone that we're going to recruit off, but if you were to look at Bayern Munich and take them in isolation, even just within a team, there's so many different styles of player. And I mean, I think Sacha Boey come out the other day and said about the physical nature of the Ligue 1 compared to the Bundesliga, and he said he finds it a bit slower than physically than what he did face in France. And I mean, it's quite interesting, right? Is even if a player's saying it, so I think it would probably confirm what you said. But in terms
his experience, you're going off his judgment.
Yes,
of
exactly,
the league.
and what he has to face. But for me as a scout, is I don't go to Norway and go, we're going to find really technical players here, and we're not going to find any fast players. Like, that's not something that we'll do. We will be sent a list of players that pop up in the data. We'll also do our own work, and obviously the network that we have and the information that we have that we know, and we'll just go in and scout certain players. And again, it's about making sure that we're painting a full picture for the people above us who are making the decisions as to who we sign or not, and making sure that the scouting reports that we write for the people that haven't seen this player yet get a clear view on who he is, what type of player he is, where he could fit in our squad, where we see his role in the future. Can we see us selling him on in 3 years' time? If so, where do you see him being sold on? What type of player is he currently in our current team? Like, what role? Is he a development player? Will he need a loan? Is he someone that comes from a culture that maybe needs a little bit more help to settle in Germany than someone else? I mean, obviously I'm an Englishman in Germany, and everyone speaks English, but of course not everyone can speak English. So if they're moving from Ecuador, if they're moving from Colombia, what can we do as a club to help them settle in when they come to Germany? So, I mean,
how much do you factor the cultural integration in taking someone from South America, let's just say, for example, and they come into the Bundesliga, very different cultures? How would you grade something like that? Would you? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very difficult to gauge until you meet the player, obviously.
Exactly.
You know about him personally. It's very hard to gauge that, isn't it?
I think you can take a step back and sort of, there's certain attributes that might have happened in their career that lend you to have an opinion on whether the player would settle or not, or whether they would need more help. My scouting reports will always talk about whether I think the player could settle in Germany, or if he's coming from a market that's not Germany, how do I see him settling in terms of the information that I have? Does he speak German? Has he had German grandparents? Has he had a move in the past which hasn't worked out very well? Like, again, we can only comment on the information that we know, and part of a job as a scout is actually trying to be an undercover spy as well, is trying to find out all the information that is not out in the public domain. Talk to people that know the player. Again, is the people you work with in the past always create a network that they may know someone that will then have some information on the player. Again, is every scouting report we have to write should have enough information that the people above us, even if they've never heard of this player before, they can read the scout report and have a full-on picture in their mind as to who this player is. And that comes down to character profiling. Is he someone that we believe, based on what we know, can come into the Bundesliga and hit the ground running? Or are they going to need extra support? Or is it just a complete no? We don't go there because of what we know. Okay.
Last question, Phil. What has been, I've got this down, and this is going to be really interesting. What has been either the biggest learning point of your career in terms of something that you were still professional in the game, but you had an experience and you adapted from that experience, or still the hardest part of scouting for you?
I'll go for the hardest part of scouting. I think, of course, it's everyone's dream job, and I absolutely love it. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I think sometimes I'm not going to come on here and be negative, because of course it's the best job, but the hardest thing is trying to predict where a player is going to be in the future. And also, there's so many factors that go into him fulfilling his potential. So, like, we look at young players, so typically it's not about their current ability, it's also about where they are going to be in the future with that potential. So it's about, especially when we see so many players in a week, again, we could write, I don't know, 70 plus reports in a week, and you put that across a season, how many reports that's going to be, and also trying to create certain shadow squads in which we're now, if it pops up that in a year's time we've got a right back that's his contract's coming to an end, obviously we know that we're going to need someone coming through, and when you see so many right backs, it's trying to make that ranking system that you spoke about before with the data is doing it from a scouting perspective. Like, do you see, as I say, we scout for a role. We don't scout for a position. So I spoke about Rafael Guerreiro and I spoke about Alphonso Davies. Like, they're two players that have completely different roles when they play in the team. They have complete different attributes that make them completely different players. So when we're recruiting for a certain role, we need to make sure that we're watching all players that have this type of role and can play in this type of role. So when you're looking at 30, 40 different right backs of this role, is you're trying to create a ranking and keeping it on the fly as to who's the best one and who's the best fit. And again, there's so many other things that come into account. Transfer fee. availability. Are they going to move? Do they want to move? Transfer fee, are we going to pay it? Can we afford it? Is there going to be a transfer fee or not? Salary. So again, these are all like filters. If you look at the data, you can filter the data down, and the long list can become a short list really quickly.
Yeah.
And again, similar to that is for us is not every player in the world is available to Eintracht Frankfurt. Not every player is available to other teams in the Bundesliga that maybe is going to be in our market. So it's a case that as a scout, you need to, you have to keep one eye on the market at all times and one eye on the world. Again, is if a player moved 2 months ago, or if you're watching a game and you're like, oh, this player's playing well, like you need to know the background of that player. Has he just moved to that team? Because if he's just moved 2 months ago, the likelihood of him moving again in the next 3 months is going to be very low. So you need to be on top of absolutely all the information, all the transfers that are happening, contract end dates. You need to be on top of everything, and that's the hardest part of scouting, is making sure that this overload of information that you get, not only from the data, not only from agents, not only from the information that you know from the past, is trying to keep on top of it all and making sure that we're organised. And again, as the scouts, like we have to organise our travel as well. So if we're going to Switzerland for a game, of course it's expensive to go, right? We could cover it on video, but it may get to a point where we want to get live opinions on this player. So we have to make sure that maybe we can see multiple games in the region. So making sure that we plan our diary, making sure that we've got enough time to get from one game to another game, because a 3 o'clock kickoff and then a 6 o'clock kickoff only gives you an hour of travel time or less. And I mean, I like to be organised, so I like to be there an hour at least before a game. But of course, the travel time at different times of the day is also completely different. So do you give yourself enough time to go to 2-3 games in a day?
Yeah, so you'd say planning.
a lot of planning. But I think that's also what makes it interesting, is it's not an easy job. Everyone loves football and everyone can spot a good player, but can you spot a good player for the system that you play?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I mean, that's a perfect way to end it, really. So thank you very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this episode, please like and comment, and we'll be back next week for more Premier League analysis. Thank you.